Your Highness, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, distinguished guests, thank you for having me. My name is Frank. I come from Germany. It's an honor for me to be in your beautiful country, Oman, and in Dhofar. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I want to thank the organizers for having me. And I also want to thank the translators for translating for us, which I think deserves a special applause right in the beginning for the translation. Yeah, the topic of our first session is future visions. And I am not a politician. I am not even an economist. I teach and research into business administration, and mainly I'm a logistician. So the topic that I would like to bring to your attention, and just as a very humble suggestion, is about a logistical aspect that I consider to be very relevant if we discuss economic diversification, also in your part of the world. So what it is that I try to humbly suggest is to think about co-opetition in the logistical domain in the Gulf area. So among all the different facets that we can touch while we talk about economic diversification, I just like to focus on this point, which I believe will be relevant in the years coming ahead. And this is about thinking about scenarios in which countries in the Gulf and companies in the Gulf will grow larger economically, they will diversify their GDP, and it's just a matter of logical thinking when those companies will become competitors because they will compete from a logistical point of view for the same trade volume, going from Asia to North America or from North America, Europe to Asia. So the Asian-Gulf relation is very critical here. And if we think of growth, of economic growth, if we think of logistical growth, it means that over time it will be very likely that there will be increased competition among logistical infrastructures. Just think of, for example, Hamad Port and Duqm Port, which at the moment may not be competitors. They may grow in their own terms, but if all of this with economic diversification will go well, then over time they might become competitors. So I just try to look into that scenario and argue that cooperation is much better than competing. And in this line of thinking, it also helps to remember, perhaps, that part of economic diversification is also trying to decouple the growth of logistical infrastructures in your home country and connect it to the economical growth in other parts of the world, because you mainly capture the economic growth in China, in Asia, and you have transport equipment, logistical equipment here that is needed to basically distribute the trade volumes from China over to Europe or to North America. So you basically become more resilient and you become more independent of the growth in your own home market logistically, and you can connect to trade volumes in other parts of the world, which gives increased resilience, capability, and potential. Another point that goes into this is the aspect of logistical capacity, the potential of logistical infrastructures. And I would like to humbly suggest that when we talk about diversification, these logistical infrastructures are critical to sustain an enormous amount of growth, as we can see, for example, in the case of Qatar. Again, I'm not a politician. I go into the recent years only from a logistical point of view, and this is just an example to show how logistical capability was able to sustain the supply chains, the flows into Qatar, looking here into, for example, the transportation and the handling of milk and dairy products. Now, why did I choose milk and dairy? If milk and dairy products are not available to private consumers, people become nervous. So it is very critical in any situation to have milk and dairy products available without interruption. And to supply those products into Qatar at that time, it was critical to have air and sea logistics capability, and the number of countries that were utilized to procure, to supply milk and dairy products from was increased ample times, which is impressive in a way. And if we go further into that type of analysis, we can see that it was mainly because of superior air and also sea cargo, sea handling capacity. So just as an example, to look into logistics as something that is also an enabler, and it plays a crucial role in this entire scenario of resilience and also in this scenario of diversification. Adding to this and complementing to this is the point that when we look at the example of the development nowadays, the logistical side is so powerful that it also helps develop and further develop, in that case, Qatar as a logistical hub in that sense. So this is the first side of the case that I like to make, that I like to suggest, that we think of cooperation of logistical infrastructures. And much of the cooperation is not so much of technical things, it is also about sharing experience and sharing the knowledge and sharing the insights that came with a certain development. So if we talk about cooperation, and we talk about, for example, Hamad Port and Duqm Port cooperating in that sense, and those two aligning in a way which might not look necessary at the moment, but it will be in the future. So if it is in the future, why not doing it now already? There seems to be some minimum requirement for two partners to consider this partnership to be cooperative. Like if it's with my wife the same. When I go home and I empty out the refrigerator all the time, and I kind of compete with her about resources, and I empty out everything all the time, it's not very cooperative. So if you're in a partnership, you have to think about the other half too. So this is what I mean with minimum requirements for cooperation. At the same time, there seems to be an upper boundary for competition. Of course, when you have two partners as distinct entities with distinct goal systems that do not merge in a way, and they stay autonomous entities, of course they will remain and they will remain to have their own goal systems. But if they kind of cooperate, then you need to check if there is a kind of an upper boundary for competition that you still allow to take place. So if we combine this, there is a preferred level of partnership, an area, a logical area, in which we perceive that when two partners work together, they kind of have a zone of a good partnership, keeping all those different facets into mind. And the scenario that we are looking at, for example, is that those infrastructures are strategically linked in a sense of sharing experience. And the question might be, what could they share? Well, let's talk about digitalization. Digitalization is something that both of those infrastructures need. It is something that, well, not only those two infrastructures need. We're talking about digitalization, smart cities, smart development everywhere. But it's also true that digitalization hits those two infrastructures, so why not cooperate in terms of digitalization among those two infrastructures? Why not think about sharing experiences in other logistical areas? Because again, cooperation is much better than growing infrastructures by themselves and then competing for the Asian traffic. So this is just, I tried to make this very brief. This is just a humble suggestion to also consider when we talk about economic diversification in mind with competition among logistical infrastructures. Thank you so much for the attention, and thank you for having me.